Hey guys, tonight we're time traveling to a place where comfort is an unfamiliar concept, privacy doesn't exist, and coffee hasn't even been invented yet. Welcome to your first and very likely only day in a medieval village. You wake up on a lumpy straw mattress that squeaks with every move. There's a hen perched on your chest and a dog curled up at your feet. It's not your dog. Nothing here is really yours, come to think of it. Your new room smells like wet hay, unwashed humans, and last night's attempt at stew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink in the dawn light that's spilling through the cracks in the wooden shutters. There's no glass in the window, by the way. You have to get used to sleeping through drafts, mice, and the occasional owl hoot that feels like a ghost whisper. You sit up, scratching your neck because the wool blanket you wrapped yourself in is giving you a rash. Also, you now have fleas. You just do. Outside, someone is already shouting. Likely the town crier, whose job is to yell news at you whether you like it or not. And since literacy isn't a widespread perk here, that's your version of a morning paper. The news is grim: someone's cow has gone missing, a pig gave birth, and taxes are due again. Of course. You shuffle to the door and step into the muddy path that passes for a street. It's less road and more shared drainage system, so your feet immediately sink a little, and something squishy makes its presence known between your toes. It could be turnip mash. It could be something worse. You don't ask. Villagers are already busy. A woman is hauling a bucket of water from the nearby stream, using muscles forged by lifting generations of wooden pails. You try to nod politely and get a full head-to-toe glance that says, "You look soft." She's not wrong. Everyone else here looks hardened by weather and disappointment. You're living in a thatched roof cottage shared by your host family, a term that loosely translates to a bunch of strangers who now know what your feet smell like. You have zero privacy, and your room is a corner partitioned off with a curtain, which, of course, does absolutely nothing to block sound, light, or snoring. Breakfast is technically coming up, but before that, you're expected to help with the morning chores. First up, feeding the animals. The chickens are easy, just toss them some grain and hope they don't peck your ankles. The pig, on the other hand, eyes you like it remembers a time when humans were on the menu. A mainstream historical fact: pigs in medieval villages were often semi-feral and could be dangerous, especially when food was scarce. As you stumble back inside, there's a fire already crackling in the hearth. Not for warmth, it's never warm, but for cooking. Your host mother, a woman who could probably break a tree branch with her bare hands, is stirring something in a pot that smells like damp socks and root vegetables. It's porridge, and it's all you're getting. You sit down with a wooden bowl and a spoon that's probably older than you. One bite in, and you realize it's cold. They started it before dawn. You missed your window for lukewarm. No one speaks much during meals. Chewing is loud, and conversation is considered an extravagance unless it's about livestock or someone being cursed. And then, as you're finishing the last clump of oats, a man bursts in with a goose under one arm and panic in his eyes. Something about ill omens and a priest with a twitchy eye. You're not sure what any of it means, but everyone takes it seriously. Superstition isn't a hobby here, it's the operating system. A quirky tidbit: in many medieval villages, people believed sneezing too hard could invite demons. Bless you. You shuffle outside again, already tired, and it's not even mid-morning. Your arms itch from the straw mattress, your stomach feels unsettled from the cold porridge, and your entire body is screaming for caffeine that simply doesn't exist yet. Historians still argue whether some monastic brews of the early period had stimulating effects similar to tea, but for the average peasant you're stuck with tepid ale or barley water. The sun is higher now, revealing more of the village. There's a blacksmith hammering away, a group of children chasing a goose, probably the same one from earlier, and a cart being pulled by a donkey that looks absolutely done with life. You feel a kinship with the donkey. There's no schedule posted anywhere, no clock tower to chime your next obligation. You're supposed to know what to do because you've done it every day since you could walk, except you haven't. You're just visiting. But no one cares. You'll learn the hard way. As you wipe your hands on your tunic spoiler, it doesn't help, a bell rings from the church tower, low and solemn. Time for everyone to say a quick prayer, or at least pretend to. Religion isn't optional. It's stitched into everything: your work, your sleep, your superstitions, your food. You shuffle toward the chapel, trying not to trip over a loose stone in the path. And you think, this is just the beginning. And it is. Getting dressed, in your current reality, is something you probably do half asleep with one hand, maybe while scrolling on your phone or sipping overpriced coffee. But here, in this charmingly damp medieval village, it's a battle of layers, knots, smells, and textures that feel like burlap had an argument with itself. You start with the shirt, the tunic. It's made of rough, undyed linen that has all the softness of sandpaper dipped in vinegar. It's not tailored to your body, it's more like it was made to fit every human ever. The seams itch instantly, and there's a slightly mysterious stain near the neckline. You decide not to ask. Next comes your chausses, which is just a fancy name for cloth tubes you awkwardly tie around your legs. No elastic, of course. That technology hasn't arrived. These are held up with braided cords that wrap around your waist and thighs. You don't just pull them on, you negotiate with them. And after 3 tries and a small crisis of confidence, they're sort of on. A quick fun fact: mainstream history tells us that people did, in fact, own very few items of clothing. 1 or 2 full outfits at best. Washing them was a luxury. You were expected to wear the same thing until it could basically walk itself to the laundry river. And medieval rivers weren't exactly tight-scented. You grab your belt and all-purpose tool hanger, purse holder, and occasional weapon and wrap it around your middle. No pockets in anything. If you want to carry something, you tie it to your waist or stuff it in your shoe. Speaking of shoes, they're more like floppy leather pancakes with holes where your toes want support. Imagine stepping on gravel with paper bags on your feet and you'll get the idea. Once fully assembled, your outfit smells like wood smoke, cabbage, and generational fatigue. And here's a quirky tidbit: many peasants would rub garlic or onion on their clothing to ward off illness and evil spirits. So, congratulations, your outfit might now also be seasoned. Now for the outer layer, a woolen cloak. This is your main defense against cold, wind, and judgmental stares. The cloak fastens with a brooch or a tied knot, both of which you fumble with until someone sighs and does it for you. A grandmother-looking villager with an expression that says, "You'll never make it," secures it, and walks away muttering in what may be Old English or just pure disapproval. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants had personal aesthetic preferences or if fashion was purely utilitarian. There are tales of folks dyeing clothes with plant-based pigments, but unless you're wealthy, you're probably living in a world of beige, brown, gray, and the occasional kind of green if you squint. Color is for the rich. You're wearing mud. With your outfit fully assembled, tunics, belts, leggings, boots, cloak, you finally step outside. You're sweating. It's not even warm out. But the fabric traps everything. You're now carrying about 10 pounds of woven regret. A group of children stops to stare at you. One whispers something and giggles. You look down and realize you've put one legging on inside out. There's no fixing it without disrobing in public. You nod solemnly, pretending it's a fashion choice. The chickens do not look impressed. There's a knock on your doorframe, and your host brother appears, holding what can only be described as a hat. It's wool, and vaguely conical, and smells like it's been through 3 winters and 1 battle. He puts it on your head without asking. "Now you look like a real peasant," he says, and grins. You're not sure if it's a compliment or a warning. You shuffle toward the center of the village, now part of the costumed masses. Except, they're not costumed. This is just life. You pass a group of women spinning flax into thread, their hands working so fast it's like sorcery. They barely glance up, and you get the feeling they could spin your entire outfit in half a day while also baking bread and warding off ghosts. The town elder appears next, a man with eyebrows large enough to shelter birds. He gives you a once-over and says, "Fit for muck work, I suppose." You're not entirely sure what that means, but he walks away laughing softly, so probably not a compliment. And then you notice it? The smell. It's not that it wasn't there before. You were just too distracted by the texture of your shirt and the hopelessness of your shoes. But now it hits you in full. It's a bouquet of manure, sweat, hay, unwashed everything, and the faintest suggestion of wet dog. There's no deodorant. No scented laundry detergent. Everyone just smells like effort. You pass the village well and watch someone lower a wooden bucket on a fraying rope. The water is slightly brown but still considered good. You make a mental note not to drink anything you can see through. The village tailor, yes, there's one, shuffles past wearing a shockingly nice doublet that makes everyone else look like they're wearing drapes. He gives you a nod and says, "You'll get used to it." You want tea. But it's nice of him to lie. You look down at your feet, already damp, already blistered, and realize you haven't even started your chores yet. You're not even breakfasted properly. You've simply gotten dressed. And you already want to lie down again. You may think you've had a rough morning now and then, maybe your alarm didn't go off, or your oat milk ran out. But here in the medieval world, breakfast is not so much a meal as it is a fleeting concept, and your body is about to learn that the hard way. There's no coffee. Let's start with that emotional bombshell. No warm mug, no gentle caffeine jolt, no soothing bitterness. The closest thing to a beverage you're offered is a warmish, watery ale, sometimes called small beer, which is weaker than today's drinks but still oddly fizzy and fermented. The idea is that it's safer than water, which, as we mentioned earlier, looks like it has opinions. So, you drink it, reluctantly, and your stomach gives a quiet burble of protest. Now comes the food, which is not exactly Instagram worthy. You're handed a hunk of black bread, dense, heavy, and slightly burned on one side. It's made from coarse rye, full of husks and bits of straw. This isn't because someone messed up the recipe. It's just how flour works when your millstone is dull and your grains are half rodent chewed. Next to the bread is a ladle of pottage, a mushy stew made from whatever was left in the pot overnight. Think lentils, turnips, cabbage, maybe a lonely piece of barley. No spices, no salt, and certainly no garnish. Just a bubbling reminder of culinary minimalism. You take a bite. It's hot. It's bland. It's fine. But you can't help wondering if even the rats were like, no thanks, I'm cutting carbs. A mainstream historical fact here: for the average peasant, breakfast was modest at best, often skipped entirely if time or food was short. The big meal came at midday, when energy was most needed for field labor. So if you're wondering why your portion is barely a snack, it's because you're expected to earn every bite by the sweat of your overlayered brow. As you gnaw the bread into submission, the village rooster, who sounds like he's gargling rocks, announces that it's time to work. Your host brother reappears, shoves a wooden rake into your hands, and jerks his head toward the fields. You haven't even finished your bread, but there's no such thing as sitting down to enjoy a meal. You walk and chew, and half of your pottage spills down your tunic. It blends in with the other stains. No one notices. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were nutritionally balanced or just barely survivable. There's evidence that some communities got enough protein through beans and occasional fish, but the key word there is occasional. Meat is rare, mostly reserved for nobles, and even then it's preserved with salt thick enough to pickle a boot. You pass a bread oven on the way, an outdoor, dome-shaped kiln that radiates heat like a sun trap. A woman is shoving fresh loaves inside with a wooden paddle, her arms dusted in flour and ash. She doesn't speak, but her eyes say, "Don't burn anything." You don't plan to, but given your track record with toast back home, it's a 50-50 chance. A quirky tidbit here: some communities flavored their pottage with animal blood for extra protein. It's not mentioned out loud, but the reddish streak in your stew suddenly makes more sense. You swallow, politely. Very politely. By the time you reach the field's edge, the sun is rising just high enough to blind you at every angle. There are no sunglasses. You squint like you're perpetually confused, which honestly feels accurate. The rake is too long, too splintery, and has a wobble that makes you question whether it's really a rake or just driftwood with ambition. The job clearing stones from the soil. Why? Because crops hate rocks, and there are somehow always more rocks. You bend, lift, drop. Bend, lift, drop. It's a soothing rhythm until your back makes a creaking sound like an old ship's hull. You glance at the other villagers. They move with practiced ease, chatting softly in dialects that blur together. No one is using their phone. Obviously. But even their hands don't rest. There's a baby in a sling on one woman's back, and she's simultaneously weeding and nursing. You begin to understand that tired is a permanent state here, not an exception. At one point, a boy runs by with a jug and hands you a drink. You sip before asking. It's sour. Vinegary. Possibly spoiled cider. He grins and says, "Wakes you up better than a rooster." You believe him. Your eyebrows have stiffened. A local dog, a mix between a sheep and a hallway rug, plops down next to your pile of rocks. It smells like fermented barn, but it has kind eyes. You take a moment to pat its head. The dog yawns. You yawn. It's a mutual understanding. You think about lunch. About the possibility of cheese. Then you remember, most cheese was curdled in stomach lining and aged on shelves that looked like they were built by drunken carpenters. Still, it beats more pottage. As the sun rises higher, your layered outfit becomes a personal sauna. The wool sticks. The linen chafes. You are wearing a sweat lodge with buttons. You think about home, about climate control and breakfast burritos. But here, breakfast is done. The day is beginning. And you've got rocks to lift. The sun keeps climbing, and so does your discomfort. By now, your shoulders ache from the endless stooping and hauling, and your legs are developing an attitude. You begin to suspect that the human body simply wasn't designed for medieval agriculture. Or at least not your body. Modern gyms let you lie down between sets. This place not so much. A bell rings somewhere in the village, clear, metallic, and almost melodic. You pause, rake in hand, daring to hope that it signals a break. But no one else stops. Turns out, that bell it's just for the local monastery's midday prayers. Not for you. Not for peasants. You're on nature's clock, and nature is not known for granting PTO. Eventually, a wiry man with permanently squinting eyes waves at you to come help with something different, the cesspit. You stare at him, then at the rake, wondering whether you'd prefer eternal rock hauling after all. But duty calls, and it smells like duty. The cesspit is exactly what it sounds like, a hole. A disgusting, oozing pit of waste just beyond the livestock pens. It's part of the communal latrine system, or what passes for it. There are no toilets, no plumbing, and no dignity. Just wooden planks, straw, and centuries of bad decisions. Someone has to stir it periodically to keep it from turning into a gelatinous nightmare. Guess who drew the short straw here? A mainstream historical fact to keep you motivated. While castle dwellers had guard robes, basically a chute that dropped your business into the moat, most medieval folks simply used pits, chamber pots, or, when things got really desperate, the corner of a barn. Sanitation was as much about distance as it was about removal. If it wasn't next to the food, you were winning. Armed with a long wooden stick that looks suspiciously like it was formerly part of a fence, you begin poking the surface of the cesspit. It gurgles. You gag. The dog from earlier has followed you here and wisely stays upwind. A quirky tidbit for this lovely moment: people once believed that the foul smells from waste could carry disease by corrupting the air, what we now call the miasma theory. They weren't entirely wrong. Before germ theory, stench was the enemy, so people burned herbs, carried flowers, and sometimes wore masks stuffed with lavender. You, sadly, have no lavender. Just a strong sense of regret. Nearby, a woman tosses a bucket of something vaguely beige into the pit and nods at you. You nod back. You're part of this now. You're in the system. Historians still argue whether medieval sanitation practices were more symbolic than effective, especially since waste often leaked into rivers that also served as drinking sources. In some towns, laws existed to stop people from dumping filth out windows onto passers-by, but enforcement was flexible. It was a time when walking under a window could ruin your day. Or your year. Back in the fields, you hear a small commotion. A pig has escaped and is bolting toward the forest. 3 barefoot children and 1 breathless man give chase, laughing and yelling. You consider joining in, partly for the adrenaline, partly to get away from the pit, but you're told to stay and cover it. With what, you ask? Dirt, they say. And good intentions. Eventually, you're granted a pause, which is not exactly a break. It just means your labor shifts to a different kind. You're sent to collect firewood. The forest, at least, offers shade. Birds chirp. Trees rustle. You can almost pretend it's a nature retreat until a thorn bush tears your sleeve, a squirrel drops a nut on your head, and you step directly into a puddle that smells alarmingly like old fish. Still, for a few quiet moments, you breathe. The air is earthy and green, and your arms don't feel like they're made of wet noodles. You stack some wood awkwardly, because nothing in this era is ergonomically designed, and begin the walk back, balancing the bundle like an amateur juggler. You pass a cottage where a group of women are weaving cloth. They nod. You nod. You admire their skill and wonder how long it takes to make even one shirt. The answer: days. Maybe weeks. That cheap hoodie in your closet would be a luxury beyond comprehension here. As you reach the village square again, you're invited, or rather instructed, to help with bread stamping. Apparently, the local lord has imposed a new tax. Anyone baking bread must stamp it with their initials to prove they used the lord's mill and paid the toll. It's bureaucracy in its infancy, and it's as tedious as you'd imagine. You press a heavy iron stamp into dozens of loaves, each squish releasing a puff of flour into your face. You sneeze 5 times. The dog sneezes once in solidarity. One woman nearby grumbles that the lord's steward counts the loaves twice but the taxes 3 times. You smile, half understanding, half too tired to care. Welcome to feudal economics. The work is relentless, repetitive, and completely devoid of personal glory. No one thanks you. No one claps. But you're slowly becoming part of the rhythm, like a background drum beat. Life moves not in bursts, but in endless loops: bake, dig, stir, carry, repeat. You wipe your forehead with your sleeve, which now smells like a confusing blend of compost, smoke, and something vaguely pickled. You think about hand soap. Then you remember it doesn't exist yet. You also remember that you still haven't had lunch. Your stomach growls in protest, echoing slightly in the quiet of the village square. It's past midday, which, in medieval terms, means you've missed the main meal of the day. Not because anyone forgot about you, no, they just assumed you'd eaten when everyone else did. Meals here are not scheduled events. They are passing windows of opportunity. Blink, and you're out of luck. You find yourself wandering toward the communal cooking area, nose leading the way. A few blackened pots still sit above glowing embers. One of them has the sad remnants of more pottage, this time with. Is that kale or some other leafy green thing that lost the will to live? You dip in a wooden ladle and help yourself, hoping no one notices or minds. They don't hunger outranks formality in this world. A hunk of stale bread sits beside a chipped bowl, and you tear at it with all the enthusiasm of someone who has been manually stirring human waste for the last hour. The bread could dent armor. You chew anyway. Here's a mainstream fact to chew along with your meal: medieval food preservation relied heavily on salting, drying, and pickling. Without refrigeration, people had to get creative. That meat you're hoping for likely reserved for a Sunday or festival. The dried fish sitting on a nearby board might be more realistic, but only if you enjoy the texture of parchment and the aftertaste of a sea-flavored boot. As you nibble, a man sits beside you and opens a cloth bundle. Inside, cheese. Not the smooth, melty kind. No. This is crumbly, pungent, slightly angry cheese. He breaks off a piece, offers you some, and watches your face as you taste it. It's alive. Not legally, but emotionally. He chuckles and says something that sounds vaguely teasing, possibly affectionate. You smile and nod like you understood every word. Maybe you did. Maybe hunger is the great translator. And now, a quirky tidbit for your palate: in some medieval regions, people believed that eating onions or leeks in the morning would guard against bad luck. That sharp tang in your bowl, likely onion. So congrats, you're now blessed and breathless. You shift on your seat, which is a roughly sawed plank perched over a log. It wobbles ominously. Your backside is sore from sitting, but your feet ache from standing. There is no good position in the Middle Ages. Only different gradients of discomfort. Historians still argue whether peasants actually viewed their diets as meager or if they considered it normal, even satisfying. Records suggest that while nobles feasted on elaborate dishes, common folk were content with simplicity provided they weren't actively starving. Hunger, like boredom, was a companion, not a crisis. A bell chimes again, this time closer. It's the blacksmith, signaling that he's open for business or more likely, needs assistance hauling something heavy. You're volunteered before you can protest. The forge is the loudest place in the village. Sparks fly. Metal clangs, heat radiates like a second sun. The blacksmith built like a stone wall with a beard made of soot grunts and gestures toward a stack of horseshoes. Your task: move them, sort them, don't drop them. One falls anyway. It lands near your foot. You both wince. You ask if it's going to be used today. He shrugs. Maybe. Maybe not. Things get made in advance when there's time because later, there might not be. The concept of free time doesn't exist here. Just not working yet. You try to make conversation, but the noise is too loud. He works with a rhythm that borders on meditative pounding, turning, dunking the glowing metal into water with a hiss. It's beautiful in a chaotic, dangerous sort of way. Like medieval ballet. If ballet required tongs and fire-resistant eyebrows. At one point, a boy enters carrying a broken plow tip. The blacksmith sets aside the horseshoe and begins reheating the iron. You watch, eyes stinging from the smoke, as he reshapes the metal with practiced strikes. The sparks are mesmerizing, a tiny storm of orange fireflies. You think about how this world is built on metal tools, nails, knives, chains, and how every piece passes through hands like these. Outside, the sun begins to dip. Not down to dusk just yet, but that late afternoon angle where shadows stretch and the warmth turns golden. A woman passes with a basket of laundry balanced expertly on her hip. You wonder if she ever drops anything. Probably not. Your own arms are beginning to shake from hauling, holding, always moving. You excuse yourself, stepping away from the forge. A short walk brings you to a nearby stream, its banks muddy but passable. Several women are washing clothes, beating them rhythmically against flat stones. Soap, in the loosest sense of the word, comes from animal fat and ashes. You kneel to rinse your hands and catch sight of your reflection. Oh! You barely recognize yourself. Dirt smudges. Ash streaks. Bits of hay. And your hair, it's developed a texture not found in modern salons. You run wet fingers through it anyway. It doesn't help. There's a quiet moment here, one of those rare pauses where the only sounds are water trickling, fabric snapping, and wind brushing through trees. You feel small, in a strange but not unpleasant way. Like a cog in a machine that's been turning for centuries. As you sit there, shoes off, feet soaking in the cool stream, you spot a frog leaping from rock to rock. It's free. Nimble. Probably not expected to help with tax records or pig escapes. You envy it, just a little. Then someone calls your name or, well, a version of your name that the villagers have settled on. You sigh, slide your shoes back on, and prepare to dive into whatever task they've lined up next. But hey, at least you got lunch. You follow the voice back toward the village green, where a small crowd has formed around what looks like some kind of communal dispute. Of course. Medieval villages run on gossip, grudges, and goats, and today's entertainment appears to involve all three. An old man with wild hair is waving a stick accusingly at a younger woman holding a bleeding goat. You can't make out every word, but the gist is clear: the goat allegedly trespassed and ate his cabbage. The woman insists the goat has better taste than that. You find yourself shoulder to shoulder with villagers who, like you, have paused their daily grind for a good drama. No one's stepping in because, honestly, where's the fun in that eventually, a man who seems to be some kind of elder, probably the reeve or the bailiff, steps forward to mediate. His expression is 1 part weary, 2 parts over it. He listens, rubs his temples, and delivers a verdict that sounds suspiciously like, "Let's all calm down and share the cabbage." The goat, completely unbothered, starts chewing the corner of his tunic. This is your introduction to medieval justice, which, as a mainstream historical fact, operated mostly through manorial courts in rural communities. Judges weren't trained professionals, they were local landholders or officials who knew just enough law to be dangerous. Forget lawyers, this is trial by neighbor. Of course, for more serious crimes, there were bigger courts. But for things like stealing chickens, brewing bad ale, or goats going rogue, it was all handled in-house. Sometimes fines were levied. Sometimes you were publicly shamed. And sometimes, you were just told to grow better fences. Here comes your quirky tidbit of the day: in parts of medieval Europe, animals could actually be put on trial. That's not a joke. Pigs, in particular, were frequently accused of crimes including murder and tried like humans. With legal representation. Somewhere in an old parchment archive, a pig has a defense attorney. Historians still argue whether this practice was symbolic, religious, or just a way to publicly assign blame in a deeply superstitious society. Either way, it makes today's pet court shows feel like amateur hour. After the cabbage dispute fizzles out, you're roped into helping repair part of the village fence. Apparently, someone's sheep wandered off last week and returned with a smug expression and a limp. That's considered a scandal. The tools you're handed are rustic: a dull hatchet, a coil of scratchy rope, and wooden stakes that look suspiciously worm-eaten. You try your best, but your modern muscles, accustomed to typing and maybe some casual yoga, aren't built for hammering splinters into uncooperative soil. Still, you get the job done. Sort of. One post leans like it's had a rough night at the tavern, but no one seems to mind. "It'll do for now," someone mutters, which might as well be the village motto. You notice your hands again. They're stained with soot, dirt, and sap. They look like hands that belong to someone else. Someone who knows how to yoke an ox or churn butter with a blindfold on. The transformation is unsettling and kind of impressive. The sun's dipping lower now, edging toward the golden hour. Children chase each other with sticks, which are, of course, also swords. A woman nearby hums as she braids garlic into long, fragrant ropes. You catch the scent, earthy, sharp, comforting. It mingles with smoke, sweat, and the faint sweetness of distant cow dung. You stretch your back and realize you've been hunched for hours. Everyone is hunched. Posture is a luxury no one has time for. In fact, you're beginning to think modern chiropractors would weep openly if they time traveled here. Suddenly, bells ring again, but this time, they're higher pitched and more melodic. Not warning bells. Not work bells. This is the call for evening prayers. A few villagers start making their way toward the small stone chapel on the edge of the green. It's simple, just a squat building with a wooden door, a single stained glass window, and a roof patched with more hope than shingles. You're ushered along with the others, whether you want to go or not. Inside, the chapel smells like wax, damp stone, and centuries of whispered guilt. A robed man begins to chant in Latin. You don't understand a word, but the cadence is soothing like a lullaby sung by someone who thinks you're a heretic but wants you to sleep well anyway. You kneel on the wooden floor, which is not kind to knees. The prayer is short, but it feels eternal. Eventually, it ends, and people file out slowly, some crossing themselves, others just shuffling like sleepwalkers. Outside, the sky is turning violet. A cool breeze stirs the long grass near the fence line. You take a deep breath, and for a moment, you feel calm. Like maybe, just maybe, you're getting the hang of the century. That illusion is shattered when someone reminds you, pig slop duty. Again. You find yourself back near the animal pens, dumping buckets of sour-smelling mush into wooden troughs. The pigs grunt in appreciation or mild insult, it's hard to tell. One tries to chew your boot. You shoo it away, but not before it manages to snag your laces. Should VE stayed in the chapel, you mutter. Another villager laughs. They sin more than we do. He's not wrong. As the last of the chores wrap up, you catch a glimpse of the reeve again, this time talking with another man holding a bundle of scrolls. It seems the next morning's tax tallies are being prepared. Because nothing says restful sleep like an early wake-up call to list how many beans you may or may not have hidden. You wander back toward your straw mattress, flat, lumpy, and possibly shared with a family of fleas. But before you turn in, you glance once more at the chapel, still lit faintly by candlelight, and the sky above, now freckled with stars. It's hard. It's dirty. It's exhausting. But there's something oddly peaceful here, if only you weren't expected to do it all again tomorrow. Your sleep is predictably terrible. The straw mattress crackles every time you shift, which is often, because it turns out that straw doesn't conform to your body like a memory foam mattress. It pokes. It rustles. It smells faintly of barnyard and something you hope is just hay. But what truly ruins your chances of deep rest isn't the bed, it's the bells. Again. Before dawn, just as your dream about coffee and central heating hits its peak, the chapel bell tolls. It's not a loud clang, more of a persistent metallic cough, but it gets the job done. You groan, stretch, and accidentally elbow a chicken that has apparently decided to bunk with you. You trudge outside in the gray half-light, joining the equally miserable procession of villagers yawning their way toward the day's first prayers. Monasteries and village chapels alike observe the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, etc. because if there's one thing medieval people love more than complaining about the weather, it's rigid spiritual scheduling. Mainstream historical fact, the medieval day didn't begin with sunrise, it began with prayer. Time was divided by religious observance, not the ticking of a clock. In fact, many people didn't even own a personal timekeeping device. Bells, sun positions, and communal rhythm kept everything moving. Which is deeply charming until you have to live by it. After prayers, you're handed a rough bit of bread and a thin onion soup for breakfast. No coffee, no eggs, no cereal, just the distant hope of calories. You try not to look too disappointed, but the local kids are already staring at you like you might cry. Then it's time to hit the fields again, because agriculture waits for no one, not even sore newcomers with straw in their hair. But this time, you're not weeding. Today, you get to plow. Now, you've probably never driven a plow. And you certainly haven't done it behind a pair of oxen who are smarter than they look and less cooperative than you hoped. One of them keeps looking back at you like it's considering unionizing. The plow is heavy. The ground is hard. And within 10 minutes, your shoulders burn in ways that suggest medieval peasantdom is not your calling. A neighboring plowman takes pity and shows you the rhythm, push, step, shout at the ox, adjust, repeat. It's almost hypnotic. Dirt turns in satisfying ribbons. The air smells like sweat, mud, and some sort of flowering weed that clings to your sleeves. Quirky tidbit time: medieval peasants believed that singing while plowing encouraged crops to grow better. So, as your arms ache and your boots sink deeper into muck, someone starts a low, droning tune, half prayer, half sea shanty. The oxen like it? You hum along. Historians still argue whether the singing was a spiritual appeal, a superstition, or just a way to break the mind-numbing monotony. Probably all three. After all, when your entertainment options are plowing or listening to that one guy describe his foot rash again, you'd try anything. By midday, your back is screaming, your tunic is stuck to your body, and you've invented at least 5 new curse words in your head. But you're alive. And weirdly proud of your furrows. Lunch is a step up: lentil pottage, a few shriveled apples, and a hunk of bread. You're invited to sit in the shade with the other workers, where they trade jokes about turnip theft and one-up each other with blisters. You realize how tightly knit this community is. People might grumble and gossip, but they watch out for each other. When a boy drops his bread, 3 others immediately offer part of theirs. When an old woman loses her balance, 2 hands catch her before she falls. You try not to romanticize it, but you're starting to see the appeal. The simplicity. The shared struggle. Then, just as your stomach finishes digesting its warm lentil moment of peace, someone announces it's time for laundry duty. You laugh. Then realize they're serious. You're handed a pile of tunics that smell like damp regret and a bar of lye soap that could probably dissolve metal. Down by the stream, you kneel beside the others and start scrubbing. And scrubbing. And scrubbing. The water is icy. Your fingers go numb. And apparently, you're not hitting the right rhythm, because a woman beside you tsks and shows you how to slap the fabric against a rock for maximum dirt explosion. She does it with such flair that you wonder if it's secretly a martial art. The afternoon stretches on. A breeze rustles the reeds. Someone starts humming again. You've forgotten what day it is. Time becomes a blur of chores, aches, and the faint hope of dinner. Just when you think you might get a break, a boy runs up announcing that the sheep are out again. Of course they are. You drop the laundry, shake out your sore hands, and follow a small team armed with sticks and shouted threats. The sheep are grazing near the edge of the woods, oblivious to the chaos they've caused. You try herding them. They ignore you. You try flapping your arms. They blink slowly. Finally, you follow the local method, shout nonsense and run in zigzags. Somehow, it works. Mostly. One sheep escapes. No one cares. That sheep's a known rebel. As the sun slouches lower in the sky, you return to the village soaked in river water, flecked with mud, and covered in wool fuzz. You look like someone's attempt at sculpting a human from farm leftovers. But you're smiling. Just a little. Because as miserable as it all is, there's something strangely grounding about it. You're part of something. A loop. A rhythm older than most countries. Still, you wouldn't trade your electric blanket for this. Not yet. By now, your internal clock is broken. The rhythms of medieval life have pulled you out of sync with anything resembling modern time. You no longer check for Wi-Fi. You check for bread. The evening is descending in rich blues and purples, and the village begins its slow pivot into the softer rituals of night. People move more slowly now, carrying buckets, wiping tools, calling children home. Chickens wander back to their roosts without fanfare. It's all very pastoral and poetic until someone dumps a bucket of pig's blood in the alley next to you and mutters, "For the tanning." Lovely. You're sent to help in what passes for the medieval equivalent of retail. Tonight, you get to visit the local market. Or what's left of it. You're not at a bustling medieval city fair with jugglers and fire eaters. This is rural commerce at its most pungent. The stalls are simple, wooden boards balanced on barrels, shaded by patched cloth. They're stocked with modest goods: onions, smoked fish, rough spun wool, pots of honey so thick they resist spoons like lava. You notice one vendor is selling what appears to be teeth. You don't ask. And now, your mainstream historical fact: local markets like this were the lifeblood of peasant economies. They popped up weekly or monthly, and though trade was limited by what people could carry on foot or cart, they were vital for exchanging surplus, gossip, and the occasional marriage proposal. Currency isn't always involved. You watch a man trade a basket of eggs for a chipped pewter spoon, and another haggle 3 turnips into becoming a hen. You try not to overthink the economics. Then comes your quirky tidbit: medieval people had a surprisingly complex smell etiquette. Cleanliness wasn't absent, just differently defined. People recognized body odor, but often masked it with herbs, scented pouches, or even rubbing themselves with rosemary. The idea of daily bathing was rare, but the idea of smelling respectable was still a thing. So yes, your neighbor may not have bathed in 3 weeks, but she's wearing a sachet of lavender in her bodice and feels quite dignified about it. Historians still argue whether medieval hygiene was as bad as popular culture claims. Some say people bathed more than we give them credit for, especially in warmer months or among certain classes. Others argue that cleanliness was more performative, based on visible neatness and odor masking. In any case, your nostrils have given up caring. You're handed a sack of garlic bulbs and instructed to trade it for cloth. The trader eyes you suspiciously, possibly because you still look like a time-traveling accountant who's been dragged through a hedge. He asks where you're from. You panic and say uphill. Apparently that's a place. You manage the trade just barely and return with a bundle of coarse linen. It's scratchy, off-white, and smells like old soap, but it's valuable. The woman who sent you nods approvingly and says you've got potential. You feel 10 feet tall. Dinner is simmering on the central hearth, a mix of beans, cabbage, and a chunk of salted pork that's more salt than pork. Still, you eat like someone who's wrestled sheep and bartered garlic, and it tastes better than it should. Maybe hunger is the best seasoning after all. As the fire crackles and the shadows stretch, the villagers gather for what passes as entertainment. A boy plays a simple flute. An old man tells a story about a knight who fought a dragon made of wind. Someone juggles apples poorly. One crashes into a chicken. The chicken is unfazed. This, you realize, is how people unwind. No screens. No Netflix. Just each other. And they're not bad at it. You're pulled into a circle around the fire, given a warm cup of weak ale, and encouraged to share a story. You panic. What do you say? Once upon a time, a rectangle in my pocket told me the weather instead. You describe a mountain you once saw, clouds curling over it like fingers, snow at the top glowing orange in the sunset. No dragons. Just awe. They listen, eyes wide, and ask if the mountain was near France. You nod. Sure. France. Why not? Later, someone brings out a board with carved pieces, a primitive game of mill or taffel. You're taught the rules, which are simple until they're not. You lose in 5 moves. The children laugh like you've just spilled soup on the king's lap. A young girl asks if you're staying. You want to say no, but pause. Because right now, you kind of are. As the fire dies down, people start peeling away toward their homes. A few linger to stare at the stars brighter here, without city glow to compete. You see constellations you almost remember from grade school, but none of the villagers know them by those names. They point and whisper stories, lovers turn to birds, wolves chasing the moon, a brave woman who became the North Star. You feel sleep creeping up again. Your legs ache in that oddly satisfying way that says you worked today. Your arms are sore, your skin smells like wood smoke and onions, and your brain is too tired to form coherent thoughts. Back in the shared hut, you settle into your straw nest, now slightly less lumpy thanks to your earlier rearrangement. You nestle into the scratchy blanket, grateful for warmth even if it comes with an occasional flea. Someone snores. A baby fusses. The wind rustles the thatch above you. And as your eyes start to close, you realize something unsettling. You might be getting used to this. Morning returns without permission. A rooster does the honors somewhere off in the mist, but honestly, it's the thud of footsteps and the scraping of a stool against uneven floorboards that yank you back into the waking world. Your body protests. Every joint feels like it was filed down with a medieval rasp in your sleep. You peel yourself from your straw pile and notice with delight that the one flea you managed to name Sir Ich-a-Lot has brought a friend. Charming. Outside, the sky is pale gray and wet with dew. The dirt paths of the village glisten like spilled gravy. You're not given much time to ponder anything poetic because someone hands you a bucket and points toward a low wooden building that smells like commitment and despair. Congratulations. Today, you're on latrine duty. Here's your mainstream historical fact: medieval sanitation was, to put it kindly, a work in progress. Castles often had guard-robe stone chutes that led to pits or moats, but common folk they had cesspits, privy holes, or just designated corners of the yard. Chamber pots were common, especially at night, and emptying them was either your job or the reason people moved out of your way in the street. And no, there's no toilet paper. Moss, hay, a cloth scrap if you're lucky, and we use lucky generously. You're tasked with helping clean out the village trench. You approach it like Indiana Jones approaching a snake pit, except there's no treasure at the bottom. Just layers. Unspeakable layers. Your nose wrinkles. Your soul wrinkles. You try not to breathe, but remember that's important for, staying alive. As you work beside a very chipper man named Edric who whistles while he shovels, he tells you that the latrine muck is also used as fertilizer. Good for the barley, he says. You nod and pray you never see barley again. The quirky tidbit: medieval people often believed that bad smells could cause disease, a theory called miasma. So, ironically, they might hang sweet-smelling herbs or even oranges stuffed with cloves around their necks while standing knee-deep in filth. No one thought to maybe relocate the trench. Historians still argue whether peasants understood germ theory in some primitive way. Some evidence suggests they knew certain illnesses were contagious, even if they didn't know how or why. Others say their habits were more about tradition and survival than scientific reasoning. You, meanwhile, are just trying not to fall in. After what feels like 17 years, you're released from service and allowed to rinse your hands in the stream. The water is cold and fast, and you scrub so hard you practically exfoliate yourself into the 21st century. You'd kill for soap. You'd kill for a scented hand wipe. Still, your day isn't over. It's time to help repair a roof. Why? Because thatched roofs don't patch themselves. You're handed a bundle of straw, some wooden pegs, and a very casual explanation that amounts to just get up there and don't die. There are no safety harnesses. No ladders with grip. Just a leaning wooden structure and your questionable balance. You climb like a nervous cat, all limbs and regret, and perch precariously on a sloped roof while handing straw to someone with more confidence and fewer teeth. This, somehow, is peaceful. The village stretches below in shades of earth and smoke. You can see the fields rippling in the breeze, the stream glinting like a silver thread, and tiny figures moving about their day. Someone waves. You wave back with a handful of straw. You help thatch the roof in a crisscross pattern, layering the straw tightly to keep rain out. You learn that good thatch can last 20 years assuming no fire, no windstorm, no goats with poor boundaries. Then comes the small disaster. You sneeze. The shift of weight is enough. You lose your footing, flail dramatically, and land in a hay cart below with a noof that echoes across the village. Several chickens look offended. A child claps. Surprisingly, you're not dead. Just very, very itchy. Later, as the sun begins its lazy arc westward, you're taken to the edge of the village to help gather firewood. The forest is cooler, dappled with light, and alive with rustles and birdsong. You feel like a Disney princess, until you're told to watch out for wolves. Only saw one last week, says your guide cheerfully. Great. You pick through undergrowth for dry sticks and branches, building a bundle that eventually weighs more than your will to continue. You strap it to your back and shuffle back to the village like a very tired tortoise. As evening approaches, you sit by the fire again, this time with a bit more confidence, a bit less confusion. Someone passes you a mug of spiced ale, and you sip it slowly. It's warm, earthy, and not terrible. They ask what you did today. You say, latrine, roof, forest, and everyone nods solemnly, like you've joined a secret club. Maybe you have. You notice one woman tending to a wound on her hand with a poultice of honey and garlic. You remember reading that honey is antibacterial and think, hey, they were onto something. Then someone suggests rubbing it with frog skin, and you're back in medieval reality. You drift toward your straw pile, limbs aching in that now familiar way. You're sore, you're smelly, and you're almost proud. The last thought before sleep hits you is, I wonder what fresh medieval horror tomorrow will bring. You awake to rain. It drums gently on the thatch above you, tapping out a rhythm that's oddly comforting until a small drip plunks directly onto your forehead. So much for the repair job holding up. You sit up, brush hay from your tunic, and sniff. Yep, still medieval. The village smells like wet wool, damp earth, and old onions. You pull on your still damp shoes, they never quite dried after yesterday's hay cart detour, and step outside into the kind of drizzle that doesn't look serious until you've been standing in it for 2 minutes and realize you're soaked to the marrow. Today, you're told, you'll help with the manor dues. In the feudal system, peasants didn't own their land. They rented it from a lord by working his land called the domain a few days a week. This was part of your obligation, and skipping it not advised unless you enjoy unpaid fines, passive-aggressive head shakes, or a sudden, legally sanctioned eviction. You trudge toward the manor fields with a group of villagers, all carrying tools, hoes, rakes, scythes. One man even has what looks like a shovel mated with a meat tenderizer. You do not ask questions. Here's your mainstream historical fact: feudal dues were not just about field work. Depending on your village's specific customs, you might owe extra labor during harvests, grain during tax seasons, or even hens on feast days. And yes, people kept track. There were medieval receipts, inked onto parchment by a steward who probably had a thrilling social life involving quills and ledger disputes. Today, your task is stone collecting. The fields need to be cleared before plowing, and stones big and small have to be removed. You bend, lift, walk 10 steps, repeat. Your back whines in protest. Your hands develop the texture of tree bark. Occasionally, you pretend to tie your shoe which doesn't have laces just to catch your breath. The quirky tidbit: medieval peasants often gave names to especially large, persistent rocks. These became local legends, blamed for twisted ankles, broken plowshares, and general misfortune. One nearby boulder is apparently called Old Gruff. Someone once tried to curse it away, and now children dare each other to touch it. You try not to look at it too long, just in case. You break for a brief midday meal, a thick crust of bread, a wedge of cheese, and something pretending to be ale. It's sour and probably alive, but it's calories. You eat while standing because there are no chairs, only wet grass and judgment. A steward in a long, mud-speckled cloak appears with a scroll and makes some notes as he inspects your pile of collected stones. He gives you a brief nod. You feel a strange swell of pride, like you just passed your medieval midterms. But your break ends quickly. You're handed a pitchfork and led to a pen of sheep. Ah, wool duty. The goal is to help round up the sheep for shearing, but the sheep have other ideas. You chase them, they dodge you. You corner one, it bleats in rage and darts under the fence like a tiny fleece ninja. Eventually, with teamwork, you herd them into a wooden enclosure. Shearing begins, and it's surprisingly intimate. The shearers cradle the sheep gently, murmuring to them like barbers. The wool comes off in heavy mats, and suddenly the sheep look like damp, resentful rats. You're given a turn. It's like trying to shave a marshmallow with legs. The sheep wriggles, you sweat, the shears catch awkwardly, and you accidentally snip your own sleeve. Someone chuckles. You laugh too, because if you don't, you'll cry. Or get trampled. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants found joy in this work or simply endured it with resigned stoicism. Some accounts describe lively harvest songs and sheep shearing festivals, full of dancing and drink. Others suggest the work was exhausting, dangerous, and relentlessly dull. Your vote somewhere between mildly amusing and full existential crisis. After hours of this, you smell like wet lanolin and humiliation. But hey, you did it. You helped shear 3 sheep and yourself, moved enough stones to build a small wall, and didn't get hexed by Old Gruff. As evening sets in, you're invited to the common hall for a bit of music. It's nothing fancy, just a few villagers plucking lyres, blowing into crude pipes, and clapping in time. One man juggles apples. Another tells a story about a fox who tricked a priest. Everyone laughs in that way people do when they work too hard and any distraction feels like magic. You sit by the fire, sore and soothed, and realize this might be the only form of entertainment for miles. You glance around at the faces, weathered, earnest, smudged with ash and effort, and realize something else: they're surviving. Not thriving. Not dreaming of vacation homes or latte flavors. Just surviving, and sometimes laughing while they do it. You lean back, close your eyes, and hear the raindrops resume. You wake up groaning. It's not even dawn, but the village is already stirring. The rooster sounds like it's gargling gravel again, and someone's outside your hut loudly discussing a pig that escaped. You don't ask how. You just hope the pig is okay and hasn't joined a roaming band of outlaw swine. Today, you've been voluntold to assist the reeve. The reeve is a local official, a kind of medieval hall monitor chosen from among the villagers to enforce the Lord's rules and keep everything from descending into peasant anarchy. Technically, he's one of you. Realistically, he's the guy you avoid when your wheat rows aren't quite straight. Your job is to follow him around as he checks on field boundaries, tools, livestock counts, and joy of joys latrines. He also double-checks fines, like the one issued to a man who let his geese wander into the church. Again. Your first stop is the granary. It's locked, sealed with a wooden peg system, only slightly more complicated than IKEA furniture. Inside are sacks of barley, oats, and mystery flour. You help record how much is stored and how much has gone mysteriously missing, though, let's be honest, it probably ended up in someone's porridge after a particularly rough winter. Here's your mainstream historical fact: medieval grain was precious. Entire economies revolved around its production, storage, and taxation. Grain shortages caused riots. Spoiled grain could kill. And yes, nobles often took the best for themselves while the peasants sifted through the leftovers, weevils included. The reeve mutters about rodents, shakes a stick at a suspicious squeak, and moves on. Next stop, the village's shared oven. Not every home had its own hearth big enough to bake bread. Instead, many communities used a communal oven usually run by the Lord's appointed baker. Villagers brought dough, paid a small fee called banalities, and received loaves, if the oven didn't malfunction or the baker didn't mysteriously misplace their dough and replace it with a slightly smaller one. Today, the oven's fine. The bread a little charred. You gnaw on a crust while pretending not to notice the reeve arguing with the baker over who forgot to scrape out yesterday's ashes. Then it's time for livestock inspection. You count chickens. You chase a goat out of the herb patch. You attempt to write 3 cows on a wax tablet, only to smear it with your thumb. The reeve sighs in a way that says he regrets all his life choices. Suddenly, there's commotion near the edge of the village. You follow the noise and discover a small crowd. A traveling tinker has arrived, his cart filled with tools, knives, pins, and oddly shaped bits of metal that might be fishing gear or medieval orthodontics. He sets up a makeshift stall and begins bartering. The quirky tidbit tinkers were like medieval mobile hardware stores. They wandered from village to village repairing pots, sharpening blades, and spreading gossip. Some were welcomed as vital service providers. Others were viewed as suspicious drifters with suspicious mustaches. You trade one of your wooden spoons for a tiny metal comb. It's probably cursed, but at least it'll help with the hay stuck in your hair. By mid-afternoon, you're helping the reeve settle a dispute between 2 farmers about whose ox wandered onto whose strip of land. The boundary markers are vague. The ox is unhelpfully chewing grass like it knows it's the center of attention. Eventually, the reeve makes a ruling based on hoof prints and sheer exhaustion. Historians still argue whether village justice was fair or deeply biased. Some sources describe wise, level-headed reeves. Others paint them as petty tyrants who fined people for breathing too loudly near the Lord's suite. You suspect the truth is somewhere between folk hero and power-drunk clipboard manager. As the sun dips low, the reeve takes a final lap around the village, muttering to himself about taxes, sheep math, and how the tinker probably overcharged him for that copper cup. You trail behind, arms sore, stomach growling, shoes squelching in freshly churned mud. Dinner is a thin broth with turnips and barley. It's hot, which is something. You slurp quietly while the reeve talks about a goose rebellion from 2 winters ago and how he still doesn't trust animals with webbed feet. Later that night, lying once again in a scratchy pile of hay, you realize, the reeve's job might be one of the worst. Authority, sure, but none of the glory. You're equally despised by both villagers and nobles. You enforce rules no one likes and get blamed for things beyond your control. And yet, someone has to do it. Someone has to count the cows and settle ox-related turf wars and make sure the granary isn't being robbed by overly clever mice. It's not glorious, but it keeps the village running. You stare up at the thatch roof and listen to a distant owl. And you wonder, if you somehow made it through another day here, could you do it again tomorrow? You wake with a sneeze. Hay dust. Always the hay dust. Your back feels like it was lightly stomped on by a troupe of traveling jugglers, but at least your legs still work. That's more than you can say for the wooden bucket you're supposed to carry to the well this morning. It cracks on the way back, spilling half the water and all of your dignity. You've been assigned to help the local miller today. Which is about as exciting as it sounds unless you're particularly passionate about flour, grit, and the many joys of rotary mechanisms. Still, it's one of the most important roles in the village. The mill grinds grain into usable flour, and without it, everyone's bread becomes more crunchy rock than rustic delight. You head down the rutted path to the watermill by the stream. Here's your mainstream historical fact: watermills were vital to medieval life. They harnessed the flow of rivers to turn massive stone wheels, grinding grain with a precision and scale that hand grinding could never match. Monasteries often owned the best mills, raking in profits from peasants who had no choice but to use them. Today's job: keep the hopper full. The hopper is the angled wooden chute that feeds grain into the grinding mechanism. You spend the next hour dumping sack after sack of barley into it, inhaling enough dust to mummify a squirrel. It's loud inside the mill. The great wooden gears creak and groan like an arthritic dragon. The wheel outside spins steadily, water rushing beneath it in a frothy blur. You admire it for a moment until the miller hollers at you for spacing out and letting a grain sack topple over. The miller is an eccentric man with flour in his beard and questionable ideas about pigeons. He insists they're spies. For whom, he won't say. The quirky tidbit: in some parts of Europe, millers were viewed with deep suspicion. Their control over grain and their habit of taking a customary portion as payment made them unpopular. They were often depicted in folklore as greedy, sly, or vaguely magical. In fact, one famous medieval proverb states, "The miller's soul is ground as fine as his flour." You believe it? The man gives off serious "don't touch my grindstone" energy. By midday, you've learned the basics: don't overload the hopper, keep your fingers far from the stones, and never ever question the miller's theories about goose-led rebellions. You step outside for a break and notice a line forming. Villagers arrive with sacks of grain, grumbling about the waiting time, the smell, and the way the miller once tried to tax someone's smile because it looked smug. Among them is a woman selling herbal poultices. You trade a stick of hard cheese for a packet of something that smells like moss and lemon. She claims it helps with hay fever, stomach aches, and curses placed by jealous goats. You're skeptical, but desperate. You sneeze anyway. Later in the afternoon, the millstone jams. There's a horrible grinding noise, followed by absolute silence. The miller freezes, eyes wide. You freeze too, mostly because he looks like he might blame you by default. You both poke at the jammed wheel until a handful of damp pebbles tumble out. Someone tried to sneak in bad grain again. Could ve crack the stone, he mutters, cradling it like a newborn. Repairs take hours. You fetch tools, hold torches, and nod solemnly as he lectures about the sacred geometry of wheel alignment. You do not ask how sacred geometry involves duct taping a spoon to a stick. You just smile and keep nodding. By sunset, the mill is working again. Barely. The last sack of grain is ground, the villagers disperse, and the miller rewards you with a fist-sized loaf of dense brown bread and a handful of cracked barley. It's underwhelming. You chew anyway. As you trudge back toward the village, feet sore and flour-streaked, you consider how fragile the whole system is. Historians still argue whether medieval villages functioned more through cooperation or coercion. Were peasants content in their duties, or quietly seething under a layer of feudal obligation and moldy bread? Did the miller really need to take that much grain, or was he just collecting a little extra for his pigeon surveillance program? You may never know. You pass the tinker again on your way home. He's showing a small crowd his new invention, a pot lid that also works as a fly swatter. It's not a good idea, but people clap anyway. Back in your hut, you sit by the fading fire and try to scrape flour from your sleeves. You have a new respect for the miller. And a new fear of millstones. That night, you dream of gears turning slowly, of water trickling over moss-covered wheels, and of pigeons whispering secrets in miller dialect. Somehow, you survive another day. Barely. You wake to the melodic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. It's not even dawn, but the smithy next door seems to be working on a sword, or maybe he's just aggressively flattening a horseshoe into a very useless pancake. Either way, your body protests as you stretch. Every muscle feels like it's been personally insulted. Breakfast today: stale bread, again. You chew slowly, thoughtfully, and wonder if your jaw will outlast your enthusiasm. Probably not. Today's task a real treat, mucking out the pig pens. Now, let's get one thing clear. Medieval pigs are not the cute, pink cartoon pigs you see in children's books. These pigs are wiry, mean, and vaguely demonic. They squeal like banshees and look at you as though they're one poorly timed step away from initiating a full coup. You slosh into the sty with a rake, a shovel, and exactly zero confidence. The smell, it's indescribable. Imagine a compost bin had a fight with a sewer, lost, then spent a week sulking in the sun. It clings to your nostrils like regret. Still, you press on. Here's your mainstream historical fact: pigs were an essential part of medieval life. They required little maintenance, ate almost anything, and produced valuable meat and fat. Many peasants kept pigs not just for food but also as a source of income, especially during winter, when preserved pork became a dietary staple. You've been told to clean the sty, reinforce the fence, and, if possible, not get gored. You're not entirely sure which is most challenging. A young boy assists you today. He's about 7, full of strange wisdom, and absolutely convinced that pigs can smell fear. You believe him. One pig in particular, Scar Snout, seems to be sizing you up with the calculated precision of a seasoned gladiator. You shovel faster. The pen is lined with straw, mud, and something else. You choose not to analyze it. By mid-morning, your boots are unsalvageable, your dignity is compromised, and Scar Snout has successfully bitten a hole in your sleeve. You consider a career change. Possibly to medieval person who stays in bed. Then comes the quirky tidbit: in some medieval towns, pigs were occasionally put on trial. That's right, full court proceedings, complete with judges and witnesses. If a pig injured or killed someone, it might be dressed in human clothes, placed in a courtroom, and formally charged. The outcome's usually execution. Though records exist of pigs being exonerated due to extenuating circumstances. You look over at Scar Snout and whisper, "Lawyer up, buddy." After cleaning the pens, you're tasked with feeding the pigs. You haul a slop bucket full of leftovers: turnip skins, wilted greens, and a questionable stew. The pigs descend like furry tornadoes, squealing, pushing, and jostling with all the grace of a food fight at a tavern. You barely escape with your fingers. Next, fence duty. The wooden posts are warped from last week's storm, and you're given nails and a hammer that was clearly forged during the Bronze Age. You manage to wedge the boards back into place with some creativity and a lot of grunting. At one point, you're pretty sure the fence is holding itself up out of sheer pity. You pause for a moment, arms aching, and survey the village from the pigsty. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. Children run barefoot through puddles. A woman scolds a man with a rolling pin, probably over missing chickens. Life here is chaotic, but it pulses with an odd rhythm. Like a really out-of-tune drum circle. Historians still argue whether the daily grime and discomfort of peasant life was truly miserable or simply normal by their standards. Did people suffer in silence, or were they so used to the filth, toil, and constant pig-related danger that they didn't think twice? Some suggest there was a quiet resilience, a shared sense of this is life, so we live it. You're leaning toward miserable. But you also respect the hustle. Lunch is thin onion soup with exactly one piece of carrot. A feast by local standards. You sit by the edge of the pen, sipping slowly, and watch Scar Snout nap in a mud puddle like royalty. He snores like a sack of bagpipes, twitching occasionally. You find yourself oddly charmed. A passing friar waves to you. He is cheerful, despite having shoes made entirely of rope and despair. He offers you a prayer and a boiled potato, then continues down the path humming a tune about lost saints and stronger ale. Afternoon chores are mercifully indoors. You help the farmer's wife make soap. It involves boiling fat and lye until it reaches a thick, almost gluey consistency. The smell is overpowering. You try to focus on the fascinating chemistry involved until the farmer walks in and proudly explains that last week's batch accidentally cured his uncle's foot rot. You blink. Nod. Smile politely. You will never use this soap. As the sun dips below the treeline, you return to the pen one last time. Scar Snout greets you with a snort and what might be grudging respect. You survived the pigs. For now. You walk home in silence, feet squelching, pockets lighter, dignity slightly heavier. You lie down on your straw mat, inhaling deeply through a piece of cloth you hope still smells of time. Somewhere outside, a lute is playing a haunting melody. Or maybe it's just someone trying to wrestle a cat. Either way, you close your eyes. Pig pens. Trials. Soap made from foot rot. Just another Tuesday. You wake before dawn not because of some noble medieval work ethic, but because a rooster seems determined to scream directly into your soul. You sit up groggily, your joints cracking like a cartwheel over cobblestones. The air is damp and smells faintly of mildew, firewood, and the eternal sorrow of damp wool. Today's plan, head into the village proper. You're to help the local tanner. Yes, the man who takes raw animal hides and somehow turns them into wearable, semi-waterproof, faintly horrifying leather. Fun fact, medieval tanning is not for the faint of heart or the strong of nose. You make your way down muddy lanes, dodging chickens, gossiping women, and a monk who may or may not be sleepwalking. The tannery is unmistakable. You smell it long before you see it. Mainstream historical fact time, tanning in medieval Europe was vital for producing leather goods, shoes, belts, armor, books. But the process was as brutal as it was necessary. Tanners soaked hides in a mixture that often included urine, quicklime, and fermented animal brains to soften and dehair the skins. Then, to preserve them, they used oak bark or other tannins, hence the name. You stand outside the tanner's shed, breathing through your mouth and deeply reconsidering your life choices. He greets you with a smile that's missing 3 teeth but overflowing with hospitality. He hands you a bucket. "Don't spill it," he says. You do not ask what's inside. The first job is scraping hair off cowhides that have been soaking in urine for days. You approach the pile like a bomb technician. The hide is floppy, bloated, and has the texture of a particularly sassy jellyfish. You scrape. It squelches. You gag. The tanner chuckles. It's going to be a long morning. Quirky tidbit time: some medieval tanners used dog dung in the softening process. They decollect it, sometimes paying local children to bring it in and mix it into the solution to further break down the fibers. And yes, you just realized that what you're scraping might have had a very questionable origin story. Halfway through the hide scraping, the tanner offers you a drink. You hesitate. But it's just cider. Warm, yes. Questionably fermented, also yes. But it dulls the scent a bit, and that's all you need. By midday, your hands are stained, your stomach is queasy, and your appreciation for modern leather goods is at an all-time high. You break for lunch in the shadow of the church tower, eating dried peas, hard cheese, and a crust that might double as a self-defense weapon. Children run past playing a game that involves throwing sticks at each other while shouting something that may or may not be Latin. The town crier strolls through, ringing a bell and shouting news about taxes, lost goats, and an upcoming festival that involves a lot of cabbage. You silently vow to miss that festival. Back at the tannery, you help stir a vat of bark-infused water where the cleaned hides are soaking. The tanner explains how different trees give different leather qualities: oak for toughness, chestnut for a reddish hue, sumac for softness. You nod along, pretending to take notes with your brain while also counting how many more steps it would take to escape and become a nice, quiet hermit. Then comes the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether medieval tanners were viewed as essential craftsmen or socially outcast due to the unbearable stench and unpleasant nature of their work. In some towns, tanneries were literally placed outside city walls to keep the smell and reputation at bay. Others suggest they were respected members of guilds, especially in places where leather goods were a major trade commodity. You lean toward essential but lonely, based on the tanner's extremely talkative goat being his only companion. By late afternoon, you've helped stretch a half-dozen hides on wooden frames and watched as one particularly belligerent cowhide slapped a boy across the face during a gust of wind. You try not to laugh. You fail. The tanner pats you on the back, thanks you for your help, and slips you a few pennies and an old leather scrap. "Good for patching holes," he says. You wonder what he means, then realize your trousers may be less intact than when you arrived. As you walk back through the village, the clouds above darken. A drizzle begins, soft and persistent. You pull your cloak tighter, which helps very little. A woman with a basket full of leeks nods at you. "Rain's a blessing," she says. You're not convinced. Your shoes squelch with each step. You pass the smithy again, who's now arguing with a baker about a missing ladle. The argument escalates into a debate about who makes the best porridge. You do not engage. Back at your dwelling, the fire is out and your bed is damp. Again. You light a new fire and sit by it, soaking in the relative quiet. The tanner's goat bleats in the distance. You realize it's probably your only friend now. As you peel off your grimy clothes and sink into the straw, you reflect on the marvel that is deodorant and soap that doesn't smell like despair. You close your eyes, hoping tonight's dreams aren't just an endless loop of cowhide and dog dung. You whisper to yourself, "Just one more day." You wake sore, itchy, and convinced your back has permanently fused with the straw mat beneath you. The fire has burned down to a sad orange glow, and a mouse is eyeing your boot with architectural interest. Outside, birds chirp cheerfully, rubbing salt in the wound of your aching limbs. But no rest for the medieval. Today, you're helping out at the local manor. Not because you're particularly skilled or noble, but because you're expendable. The Lord's steward needs extra hands for inventory, and you still somehow not dead qualify. You trudge up a dirt path past the village's edge, toward the imposing wooden and stone manor house. Compared to your thatched hut, this place looks like Versailles. That's an exaggeration, but in this context, any structure that doesn't leak feels like royalty. The steward greets you without enthusiasm. He hands you a wax tablet and stylus. "We're counting sacks of grain and barrels of salted fish," he says. "Don't mess it up." You stare at the stylus like it's an alien artifact. Mainstream historical fact time: medieval manors operated as administrative centers for the surrounding lands. Stewards managed everything from taxes and supplies to punishments and harvest yields. These records were essential for feeding the household, paying feudal dues, and preparing for winter or war. You shuffle through storerooms stacked with barley, rye, dried legumes, and enough salted herring to haunt your dreams. The scent is sharp, briny, and vaguely fish-murdery. The steward drones on about tithes owed to the abbey and grain losses to vermin. You nod, attempting to appear engaged while actually counting cobwebs on a nearby beam. Quirky tidbit: some stewards used tally sticks to track accounts, wooden sticks notched with parallel cuts to represent numbers. These were split down the middle so both parties had a matching half, reducing fraud. Yes, medieval folks literally used matchsticks to prove receipts. You wonder if modern accountants would consider this retro. Your next task: inventory the armory. Which sounds cooler than it is. Most of the weapons are rusty, mismatched, and so old they might belong to Charlemagne's weird cousin. You list a few pikes, a dented helm, some bows with frayed strings, and a sword that looks more ceremonial than lethal. Historians still argue whether manor-based militias were effective defenses or just peasants with sticks. Some claim that during times of invasion or rebellion, these makeshift forces could be surprisingly resilient. Others suggest they mostly served to slow down attackers until professional soldiers arrived or until everyone panicked and hid in the cellar. Speaking of hiding, your final job of the day is to accompany the steward to the manor's cellar, where pickled vegetables and wine barrels reside. The cellar is damp, cool, and smells like cabbage regrets. You help roll a barrel into position, trying not to slip on the slick stone floor. "Careful," the steward says, "that one's from the bishop's personal stock." You imagine the bishop sipping spoiled wine and complaining about peasants while trying to remember which fork to use. You're rewarded with a slice of meat pie and a mug of thin ale. It's the medieval version of a thank you card and a Starbucks gift card combined. On your way back to the village, you pass a small group of traveling musicians. They're performing near the well, singing a ballad about a knight who fell in love with a goose. You blink. You don't ask questions. As night falls, you help a shepherd herd a few stubborn sheep into their pen. One stares at you with judgment in its eyes. You bow slightly. "Fair enough," you whisper. Back in your hut, the fire is lit for once, and someone's left a crust of bread on your doorstep. Whether it's charity or a prank, you accept it with the grim satisfaction of a survivor. You're officially ending your medieval week alive. Barely. You lay back on your lumpy straw bed, letting the fire's glow blur the edges of your vision. You think of the smells, the work, the fashion choices, And the food always the food. You dream of refrigerators and running water and deodorant strong enough to tame a tanner's workshop. And now, we ease into the final wind down. The crackle of the fire softens into a distant whisper, barely louder than the gentle breath of the wind against the wooden shutters. You lie still, wrapped in the comfort of knowing the day is done, the animals are penned, and the last task has been ticked off the steward's tablet. Outside, the stars flicker tiny, ancient lanterns watching over a world that never truly sleeps. But you do. Or at least, you begin to. Your muscles slowly uncoil, your breath evens out, and the straw beneath you, scratchy and uneven, becomes surprisingly comforting in its familiarity. You think again of the village square, the tannery stench now a memory, the tanner's goat probably dreaming of freedom. You hear the distant creak of a cartwheel, or maybe it's just your mind slipping deeper, relaxing into the stillness. The worries of lords and taxes, of pickled cabbage and poorly sewn tunics, melt away. There's nothing left to inventory. No chamber pots to clean. No barley to count. Just this moment quiet, still, safe. Your body sinks into the straw, the blanket of medieval fatigue covering you like a cloak. And somewhere in that murky middle space between waking and dreaming, you realize, you survived a day in medieval times. And now, you sleep.